You know, when I read about this, not only was I not surprised, but I wanted to try to do my part to try to fight against this just a little bit, because about half of all Americans right now are saying that this entire situation with the economy and their finances is starting to take a toll on their mental health. So at least I figured during this video we can walk along the beach and be a nice relaxing atmosphere. I always love coming out and doing videos at the beach, especially when it's overcast like this, because it's just a little less hot. Right now it's actually still very hot here, even though it doesn't look like it. It feels like 102 degrees here, guys. Last time I felt this hot was last summer in Palm Springs. So right now you have 47% of adults say that they have concerns about money. This causes them anxiety, it causes them stress, causes them worrying thoughts, loss of sleep, depression, and other things that are not good for you. This is according to Bankrate's latest money and mental health survey. You know, a lot of people will say, well, Michael, all you do in your videos is talk about all of this bad stuff, and that probably makes it worse for people. Well, that's not how I see it. Actually, from my perspective, I look at it as, if you know about all the stuff that's happening and you have more of a chance to prepare for it than the next guy, then that should actually help you sleep at night, knowing that you're doing at least everything you can to better your situation given the circumstances, versus somebody who doesn't know anything and is kind of just like blindly going into this recession, not knowing how they're going to be affected by it. I think the uncertainty actually creates a lot more stress and anxiety than actually knowing what's going to happen. So about 65% of people in this survey say that their biggest concern is inflation and rising prices. And nearly 60% also say that stress is derived from paying their everyday expenses, like their grocery bill, their utilities, rent, and stuff like that. We're going to talk a little bit about CPI, the latest CPI inflation reading, later in this video. But that just goes to show you guys, like, no matter what happens with this CPI reading over the next few months, this isn't going to change, okay? People's stress and anxiety over paying the bills isn't going to go away because the inflation report came down 0.1%. 56% of people right now say that they're worried about having enough emergency savings, and 47% are concerned about being in debt. So clearly that's half of the people surveyed that are worried about the level of debt that they're carrying right now, which is also not going to get resolved by a lower CPI reading coming in, okay? So the thing that drives me nuts about this is you hear all these stories, you know, right away the CPI goes from 3.5% down to 3.4%, and everybody celebrates, you know, stock market off to the races, guys, as if this is somehow, you know, the solution to all of our problems, when the opposite is actually true. And according to a different survey from Lending Club, okay, as of November of last year, 60%, 60 guys, percent of households are living paycheck to paycheck right now. So do you think people who are in that situation really care if an inflation reading came down by 0.1%? I don't think so. And let's not forget that even at a supposed 3.4% inflation reading, which we know is a lie anyways, it still means that prices on everything are still going up on average 3.4% year over year, which means it costs more than it did a year ago, which does nothing to solve these problems that people are having. In fact, as of January this year, Bankrate determined that 1/3 of US consumers now have more credit card debt than they have emergency savings. And those two things are obviously contradictions. How somebody can have any savings and actually be carrying credit card debt makes no sense in my mind, because it makes 0 sense to pay 30% interest or even 20% interest on a credit card and only be earning 5.5% at most on your savings. You're still losing big time. So if you have savings and you're carrying credit card debt, a much smarter financial move is to pay off that credit card debt, because it's killing you with the interest. The reality is, guys, inflation really hasn't been coming down for about a year now. In fact, all the readings we got since the beginning of this year up until this most recent one, you know, inflation was going back up. It seems like it's kind of stuck in that 3.5% to 4% range. And so how is anybody supposed to feel good about this economy when all of the money they make goes towards just paying the bills or just literally living paycheck to paycheck, and people are worried about their debts and paying their bills, okay? Now, the one comfort I can add here in this video is that knowing that you're not alone. Like, literally half of the people in this country are in the same boat as you if you're in this situation, guys. So it's not like you did something wrong, or maybe you did. Maybe you did make some big financial mistakes along the way. You know who you are if you did, but the reality is a lot of people didn't, and they're just suffering because they're just not making enough. You know, their cost of living is increasing faster than their pay, and that's a recipe for falling into this situation. Even the most recent economic outlook surveys have been showing that people are expecting rates to go higher, people are expecting inflation to go up, and so these are all signs that people know that this is kind of a situation that's going to stick around for quite some time. And of course, if you're like in a one-income household, you're trying to be like the breadwinner for the entire family, then this stress goes up 10x for somebody in that situation that's trying to just provide for their family and keep the show on the road. So somebody like that not only has the financial burden of taking care of the family, but they also have the emotional stress of, what if I lose my job and this is our only source of income, and that goes away. So it can be very tough. And if you feel like you're coming up short and you're barely making it, or you're living paycheck to paycheck because you are the sole income earner of your household, I mean, the stress is through the roof, guys. Then you got to ask yourself, at what point does it make sense for your wife or your husband or whoever to get a job and start contributing? Because even though you're trying to live a more traditional lifestyle or whatever it is you're going for, there comes to a point where it's not economically feasible, apparently. Here's another phenomenon that was noted during this survey results, is that even people who can afford to pay all their bills, okay, say you're not struggling to pay, you're paying everything off, but just looking like the lack of progress, right? Like you have this big mortgage, or say you have student loan payments, things like that that you have to pay, and it looks like the balance isn't even moving, even though you're paying each month. That can also demotivate people and make them feel a little bit hopeless as well, because it just seems like you're constantly running on this hamster wheel of debt that you're never going to get out of. And that's why one of the biggest things I always talk about on this channel that will help you financially is to get out of it, guys. You have to get out of debt. If you are somebody out there carrying debt each month, regardless of what it is, I would say, except for a mortgage, because that tends to be the lowest interest form of debt that you pay, even though the amount of interest you pay over a 30-year mortgage is enormous, it's still a lower rate, right? You're only paying 3.5%, 5% if you got a mortgage a couple years ago. Even at today's rate, 7.5% is still far lower than paying for a credit card at 20 or 30%. Or a home equity loan, for example, at 9.5%. So those loans that are higher interest, you have to get those out of your life as fast as you possibly can. Otherwise, this debt situation will continue to drag you down. And then to make matters worse, people follow these influencers and stuff that, you know, are constantly posting about how great their life is, and that makes people feel inadequate in all sorts of different ways and adds to your stress and anxiety. So hopefully my channel doesn't make you feel like that, because I never talk about anything like that really for myself. And for me, it's all about you guys, you know, what most people are going through here on the channel. That's what I like to focus on. But if you're following somebody, say on Instagram, that constantly makes you feel like your life isn't good enough, then stop following them. Stop looking at that stuff. And the other big problem right now is that what used to be a good income no longer really is. It's just kind of the bare minimum that you need to earn paying for essentials and paying for life right now. For example, in 22 out of the 50 states in this country, you need to be earning at least $80,000 a year at minimum to cover the cost of the bare essentials for a family of 4. So that means no extra money left over. We're not saving for retirement. We're not taking the kids on vacation. We're paying the rent. We're paying the electric bill. We're feeding everybody. We're clothing everybody. And that's it. So that's why I say when the CPI reading comes in at 3.4% versus 3.5% the month before, no one cares, guys, including me. But I have to report on it because that's what just happened, and I want to go over some of this in more detail. And now the reason that the stock market and people on Wall Street are celebrating this is because their forecast is that it was going to come in at 3.8%, okay? And it came in at 3.4%, so far below what they were expecting. And of course, any news is good news these days for the stock market. But the thing is, this is still very far away from the 2% goal that the Fed has been aiming for. And unless we keep seeing consistent reports month after month of it coming in lower and lower like this, they're not going to be lowering rates, which for people who are carrying debt and paying interest on debt is not good news for them. That's why everybody wants these rates to come down, because people are having a hard time now affording things that they used to be able to afford, because they used to be able to just pay less for an item and not finance it. Now you have to pay more and finance stuff, and that ends up costing you way more in the end. But all these economists are saying, well, we're not worried about it now because it looked kind of scary there in the first quarter with all the inflation readings going in the upward direction, but now that it's starting to reverse, we should start heading more in the downward direction. Like, this can jump in any direction at any moment, guys. It really can. I even saw one story where they're talking about, oh, because the rent inflation has been consistently dropping over the past several months, that it's only a matter of time before the CPI catches up, because that's such a big part of the CPI. But once again, even if it does come down to 2%, it still means that prices are going up at least 2% per year on average. And it also means that prices have risen so high, and it doesn't mean that they're coming down anymore. It means that everything just got extremely expensive and is going to continue to get slightly more expensive moving forward. So none of this helps the average person that's feeling stressed about finances or is living paycheck to paycheck. And there's some other underlying data about the economy that proves things are continuing to slow down despite what we're being told. Like, for example, the retail sales are slowing down, all right? They were basically flat, and economists had predicted that it was going to be growing by 0.4%. So that's a big miss. So the weaker than expected retail sales for April indicates that the US consumer is acting with more prudence as the labor market continues to soften and prices remain persistently high. And I think this is going to be the case indefinitely moving forward. People are no longer going to have the luxury to spend more on things because they're already getting tapped out, according to what we've been talking about here. And then when they take a look at a whole bunch of different retailers like auto dealers, building materials retailers, gas stations, office supply stores, sellers of mobile homes, tobacco stores, their sales actually declined by 0.3% last month. So people are spending less money on everything right now. And I think the only thing that keeps the retail sales flat is the fact that people are paying more for everything. Just like the fast food earnings we talked about, it doesn't matter if their earnings are growing a little bit or whatever, if they're charging 20 or 30 or 100% more than they were a year ago. We talked about this a few days ago. The price increases at these fast food restaurants has been anywhere in the neighborhood between 50 and 200%, depending on the item on the menu. So it's like, yeah, no kidding, sales went up by 2% year over year because they're charging far more for everything now. Here's the other thing, guys. Consumer spending drives roughly 70% of US GDP. I've heard that it's up to 80%. But the April sales report also shows that downward revisions to the prior month's figures, which reinforces the idea that consumer spending is losing steam. You know, we get all these figures, and then 6 months later, when no one's looking, they get revised down because no one cares anymore. But those revised numbers are a reflection of what's really going on and how many jobs were really created, how many sales were really taking place at retail stores, but it's all forgotten about because that was already months ago. So now they're saying that, you know, with this CPI report starting to come in slightly lower and the retail sales weaker than expected, that this is pointing to a potential Fed rate cut in September. You know, now all of a sudden the stock market's already betting that that's going to happen, guys. Well, that's not that far away. We're talking June, July, August, September, 4 months, and they want a rate cut. I think that's going to be wishful thinking. The GDP estimates are also not coming in line with what was expected in the first quarter of this year. We already talked about in yesterday's video how many people are getting laid off, how much the job market is really slowing down right now. Like, really, all the signs that we have entered the recession are there. It's just hasn't been officially called because they're kind of just focusing on a few key data points like unemployment and the stock market figures, the jobs reports to point to everything being strong. But obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. Basically, they're still looking for this Goldilocks scenario to happen where the price growth continues to slow down and the economy continues to normalize, and none of these numbers go bananas like, unemployment or the inflation figures or anything like that. And that would fit their soft landing scenario, which would all be good news for, of course, the Biden administration, home buyers, and corporate profits. So that's what everybody wants to see happen, but that's kind of like a fantasy scenario right now. And of course, the US government is doing everything they can to put Band-Aids everywhere right now to stop the bleeding, guys. And one of those things that they continue to try to prop up is the housing market. Besides the general economy, they don't want people to stop buying houses because that is such a large sector of the economy and it drives a lot of the GDP growth and spending. People spend money on buying the house, they spend money on remodeling the house, they spend money on furnishings, decorations, everything. So if people aren't buying houses, all that stuff slows down too. So right now, the USDA just approved a new home buyer exemption on seller concessions to meet industry standards. Well, what does that mean? Well, thanks Jonathan for sending this story over. Basically, what this is this excludes real estate commission fees from the 6% cap on seller or other interested party allowances to incentivize a buyer to purchase a home. Because this whole commission change is coming down the pipeline pretty quickly now, they're allowing you to basically have the seller still pay a 6% commission, and that doesn't count towards the contributions to the sale. So they can actually contribute more or get a gift from somebody else and buy this house, guys. I predicted that the mortgage industry was going to subsidize the commissions moving forward, but already the federal government has made the first step into subsidizing these commissions by exempting this 6%. Well, 6% was the amount that people were paying in full commissions prior to this NAR lawsuit. They say that under the exemption, real estate commission fees paid by the seller on behalf of the home buyer will be exempt from this cap to ensure that the rural home buyers will retain affordable access to the USDA guaranteed home loan financing regardless of changes to real estate commission requirements. Oh, so in other words, this lawsuit was a bunch of BS and is going to do nothing to slow down home sales, at least not if the federal government has anything to say about it. Here's what it says at the bottom here, guys. The USDA Single Family Housing Guaranteed Loan Program assists lenders in providing low and moderate income households the opportunity to purchase safe and affordable homes in rural areas. This change further demonstrates the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to ensuring that all Americans have an affordable place they can call home and opportunities to build generational wealth through home ownership. Well, that's just a fancy way of saying we can't have this end on our watch because we're up for re-election soon. Now, this is not even a shot at the Biden administration because whoever else would be in charge right now, if it was still Trump, they would be doing the same thing, I'm sure. They'd be doing everything they can to try and get re-elected. So this is not, a one-sided political scheme. They all do this kind of stuff. But this shows you right here that even ahead of this commission change, it's not even official yet, it's not July yet, they're already getting ahead of it and saying, you know what, we're just gonna let you get that extra 6% contributed to the sale price of your home, and that's gonna be in addition to the caps that are already in place, which means basically that people can give you more free money to help you buy a house. I mean, seriously guys, when or where does it end? At this point, from all the things I've seen and all the things I've reported to you on this channel, I think it doesn't end. I think it's just a never-ending avalanche of stimulus until there's nothing left to give, until the economy has become so overinflated that there's no choice but to let it implode. I think that's the direction we're headed, because when you see things like this happen, I can't draw any other conclusion. Now, I said I was gonna try to help people feel a little bit better in this video by coming by the beach, but also one of my subscribers sent me this success story on how they basically were able to retire, okay? So I want to share this with you guys because some of it's still relevant, but I would say some of it is no longer relevant. So thanks, Dave, for sending over this story. He's a big fan of the channel, and he says that one thing he finds concerning the most when he looks at the comment section and things here on the videos is how depressed and hopeless people have become with their work efforts and their financial outlook on life. So he says, as somebody who is soon to be retired, who's a Gen Xer, he said the best advice he received during his working life from an older person, just set aside 10% of your net income for investment, and that's it. Back then, when he was doing this, which was the mid-80s, he was investing in cash management trusts, which are averaging about 10 to 16% interest. Obviously, he was making some killer returns with those rates. And he said he wanted me to share this with the audience here because a lot of people are just looking for that one little nugget of wisdom, and this can prevent a lot of people from losing hope by just following this one simple principle of setting aside 10% of your net income for investment. Now, the key to this, what Dave said to do, is you have to pay yourself first, guys. So what that means is, say you make $1,000 a week. That's your take-home pay after tax and everything. You need to set aside $100 every single week and act like you only have $900 for that week to spend on all of your living expenses, okay? So if you try to take 10% after all of your living expenses, then there's a good chance that you won't be able to reach that goal. And that's because too many people live beyond their means. So paying yourself first forces you to be able to take that 10% right off the top before paying for anything else, and it kind of forces you to live on just a slightly lower standard of living. And then, of course, the other pertinent piece of information here is you have to invest that 10%. You can't just save it under a mattress. But the only thing that I would say where Dave pretty much got lucky on this, that people today doing this might not get as lucky, is the stock market has been in this perpetual crazy bull market for like the past 30 years, guys, right around this time when Dave started investing in these funds. And now to reach 10 to 16% returns year over year is starting to look way less likely as things are starting to top out. Now, it doesn't mean that it will never return to that. It might in the future, but we're going to have to see a major correction in the stock market first before you start seeing returns like that again. You might still see it again for the rest of this year because they're trying to prop everything up as much as possible, but after the election, who knows? So I think you can still follow Dave's advice, but don't be surprised that if you start investing right now, particularly right now, that you might not see the returns that you're hoping for. But if you stick with it in the long run, then there's a good probability that you might see those returns over a long period of time. We're talking the next 15, 20, or 30 years or so. So use that small nugget of wisdom and just do it. Like Dave said, he's retiring now. He's probably in his 50s. So that's a pretty good age to be retiring. Hope this video helped you. Hope it helped cheer you up a little bit. And if it did, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.